For millions of years, many animal species and then human beings have come to understand that loam and silt deposited by rivers provide a great source of life and wealth. And yet, this amphibious, wobbly world, a sort of diabolical monster that inevitably sucks in and absorbs everything, has always frightened and distressed. But what is silt made of? A microscopic mineral which plays an essential part, clay, a material with extraordinary properties, a product of rock degradation. Clay minerals have a sheet-like structure and are composed of microscopic layers of aluminum and silica. Depending on the volume of water they retain, their characteristics can change drastically and range from a semi-liquid state to compact and watertight silt. They can also take the form of the dreaded quicksand. Silt alone has a unique quality on this planet. It holds all the cards required to process life. The first stages of creating a living form, be it plant or animal, quietly take place underground. It appears obvious that this peculiar, ever-changing intertidal zone between continents and oceans is where it all began 4 billion years ago. In being exposed to sunlight, silt has become the cradle of life, but also the scene of its unfortunate yet necessary counterpart, death. For millions of years, each life has nourished another as part of the inevitable and constant progress in the great cycle of life. In this part of South America, along the coast of French Guiana, lay gigantic mud banks. How were they formed? Did the Guiana rivers flow into the western shores of the Atlantic Ocean, which then spread out the heavy mud over hundreds of kilometers? Not at all. This particular silt comes from far away, very far away. It is a product of the slow and inexorable erosion of a colossal mountain range, the Andes, which stretches over 7,500 kilometers along the Pacific Ocean and is almost 7,000 meters high. Heavy rain, snow, and frost relentlessly erode and dissolve the Andes Mountains. When the snow melts, runoff clears the rubble, which has turned to clay and silt. Tens of thousands of tons are massively dumped into the Amazon River and carried over 3,000 kilometers to the Atlantic Ocean. They soon get caught up in oceanic currents before they wash up on the shores of northern Brazil as far as Venezuela. These layers of silt contain all the essential ingredients to the development of life, an incredibly complex process dating back billions of years. What are these ingredients? First, an energy source. As we are standing right under the equator, the sun shines straight overhead all year round, while clouds cast the only possible shadows. Then comes water, Here, on the coasts of French Guiana, it is a blend of rainwater, fresh water provided by the rivers, and seawater. Third is carbon. It is present both in the air in the form of carbon dioxide and prominently in the water in the form of carbonates. Last but not least, essential nutrients for the development of living cells: nitrogen, phosphorus, and silica. Fortunately, all are available here as they are trapped in the clay. So, who will be the first key players to take advantage and combine these widely available components? Only organisms with chlorophyll have the ability to convert solar power into chemical energy. Like any other marine environment in different parts of the world, they are microscopic cells known as algae. Only difference here is that they live in the mud. For the first essential process of photosynthesis, time is of the essence and above all, limited. Thus begins a race against the clock. While all the components are in place, the most important factor isn't always available: sunlight. At night, it is impossible for the magic conversion of solar energy into chemical energy to happen. Not to mention that even during the day in direct sunlight, darkness reigns from only a very few centimeters below the water's surface due to the large amounts of Amazon-borne silt and clay carried in by the Guiana currents. Fortunately for Guianese algae, the moon is on their side. As it revolves around the Earth, the gravitational pull of the moon draws the oceans towards it, causing the water to recede periodically from the coast, a phenomenon otherwise known as tides. The mudflat, exposed at low tide, becomes a fantastic energy transformer, as well as a great breeding ground. The chlorophyll in algae has the extraordinary ability to absorb solar energy and consequently produce glucose from the carbon dioxide dissolved in the water, all the while releasing oxygen. A phenomenon which has revolutionized the conditions of life on Earth. Algae proliferate on the surface of the mud bank. This individual strategy is then replicated by millions of cells. As a result, the color of the entire mudflat will change gradually over the course of several hours. These algae are filamentous cyanobacteria. They are the descendants of the very first photosynthetic cells to have appeared on Earth 4.1 billion years ago. Now, within the phytoplankton, these archaic and robust survivors of extinct worlds coexist with large diatoms and microscopic dinoflagellates. This community is the first to synthesize carbohydrates, the actual driving force of life, which are then eagerly exploited over and over again by the entire food chain. A skillfully crafted silica wall makes up the body of diatoms and protects their chloroplasts, the tiny green organelles containing chlorophyll. But more importantly, this rigid body acts in the same way as a solar panel does, by channeling light energy towards the chloroplasts. It is punctured by multiple microscopic holes, allowing the cell to be in contact with water in order to access all the nutrients it contains. Inside these tiny, highly sophisticated factories is where the fundamental process of photosynthesis takes place. The carbohydrates produced are stored as lipids inside tiny droplets. The resulting oxygen then enriches the atmosphere, which means these billions of diatoms alone are responsible for 20% of the planet's oxygen. But how do the algae keep from being buried by the continuous flow of new silt deposits? They don't have much choice. It is an absolute necessity for them to rise to the surface in order to catch enough sunlight. Evolution has naturally selected the ideal morphology for moving through a viscous environment such as mud. Diatoms have a very slender shape, which enables them to glide between the microscopic particles of silt. Even more extraordinary is the fact that these migrations are unrelated to water flow. These movements are in fact deliberate and proactive. Their only function can only be to search for light, and therefore, energy. But when you're algae, how do you know when there is light outside? To this end, protozoa and dinoflagellates are equipped with red pigmented photosensitive cells, a kind of primitive set of eyes, so to speak. They guide them towards the light, but also warn them whenever there is an urgent need to stay buried in order to protect themselves from UV rays, following excessive sun exposure. How do they move around without transportation? Thanks to the mucus they expel, diatoms are able to propel themselves in response to light or dark conditions. At rising tide, once they are done filling up on solar energy and they have stored it through chemical bonds of organic compounds, the algae head for the depths of mud with a specific purpose: to replenish their stock of nitrogen and phosphorus. Thanks to these nutrients, as they burn part of the accumulated energy, they continue to generate molecules crucial to us all, but which only they know how to assemble. So goes the cycle of tides and days. In the sun and at low tide, energy is stored and fuel is produced in the form of carbohydrates and lipids. In the dark within the mud, nucleic acids and proteins, the molecules of life, assemble and multiply. The surface of the mudflats is a giant layered canvas continually under construction as tides come in and go out. It is composed of thin overlapping sheets of migrating algae and microlayers of silt brought down from the Andes via the Amazon. enriched and consolidated by large quantities of sugars produced and expelled by diatoms. All of this extremely energy-rich organic matter fosters the prolific growth of microscopic newcomers in the mudflats. Bacteria. A single milliliter of mud contains more bacteria than there are humans on Earth. The silt's Amazonian origin, the sediment resuspension by waves, and tidal currents, as well as a wide variety of carbon sources, contribute to making the mudflats of Guyana home to the world's most diverse bacterial populations. In the vast mudflats of French Guiana, who will be the first to devour the billions of algae and bacteria and steal their precious energy supply? Both algae and bacteria are single-cell organisms. Defenseless as they are, they will be preyed upon by a multitude of predators who will ruthlessly chop them up and swallow them, thus robbing them of the riches they have so patiently built up. These new players now entering the scene make up the vast world of mud's microscopic fauna. Numerous species coexist within the surface layer of mudflats, but the most prominent ones are primitive worms called nematodes and rotifers. Along with microscopic crustaceans, they form what is known as the zoobenthos. Naturally, all these species share the same morphological features. A compact spindle-shaped body suited to a world where very little space is available to roam freely. The convergence of various forms of life in mud is obviously no coincidence. It's a matter of necessity. These predators are far more complex than bacteria and algae. They are composed of a patchwork of specialized cells and organized into multiple organs, each one with its own function. The individual success of these cells no longer depends solely on themselves. It hinges on the success of the overall organism they constitute. From this moment on, the precious organic matter will be passed from one living organism to another, from one predator to another, from the weakest to the strongest, from the least armed to the fittest, all towards a single universal purpose, the relentless race for survival. Flatworms are undoubtedly some of the most fascinating creatures on Earth for their ability to regenerate. They are capable of growing all of their organs using simple tissue fragments from any part of their body. They perform the most astonishing twists and acrobatic turns. They swallow diatoms despite their rigid silica cell wall. Their flexible bodies are covered with numerous cilia, which allow them to relentlessly hunt down their prey. Always on the prowl, these archaic animals tirelessly explore their environment as if driven by a mysterious force. burning urge to live leads to all kinds of cruel acts. But it's also a chance for the weakest links and poorly prepared creatures to come up with uncanny strategies and tricks to take advantage of the slightest opportunity. At rising tide, the flood of water incoming from the open sea allows countless hungry customers of all shapes and sizes to effortlessly reach the mudflat. For the duration of the high tide, they will make the most of all the resources concentrated on the surface. Countless larvae and young fish and shrimp, as well as myriads of swimming copepods, take part in the feast. Among them, calanoid copepods have the ability to propel themselves by leaping, thanks to powerful antennae located at the top of their head, which are as long as their body. These voracious consumers come along with phytoplankton composed of diatoms much larger in size and radically different in shape compared to mudbank algae. They are anatomically designed to float on the surface of oceans and thus to fully bask in the energy of the sun. Unable to move, they include either small cylindrical cells in long chains or single large circular drum-shaped cells made up of two interlocking valves and rely on sea currents to carry them along. The ebb tide then proceeds to sweep the replete wildlife out to sea, where it will in turn become prey for numerous large adult fish. These large fish strive to stay away from the mudflats because they know what a deadly trap they can be. The potential benefits would be far too small compared to the risks of being trapped in residual ponds, which will end up drying in the sun, not to mention all the greedy predators awaiting their demise. During low tide, the surface of the intertidal mudflat offers a tremendous amount of living matter over dozens of square kilometers. It attracts crowds of starving animals whose size has nothing to do with that of the mud's fragile inhabitants. Some of the most active in the community are crabs, who indiscriminately gobble up everything from bacteria and algae to microcrustaceans without a second thought. Taking refuge in their burrows at high tide, they appear as soon as the water withdraws. As soon as they emerge from the mud, they have but one obsession, because time is running out for them as well: to ingest as much organic matter as possible before the tide rises again. This particular species is the Uca mariquani, also known as the Brazilian fiddler crab. A true perfection of nature, these crabs are particularly at ease in soft mud. As they are half land and half marine creatures, they thrive on loose sediments. Male crabs carry a massive claw either on the right or the left side, which they use as a powerful tool to dig into the mud and tend to their burrows. This voluminous and cumbersome organ mainly serves as a social function, marking their territory and attracting females. Sorting out organic matter from mud is a tricky business, especially when your food is right under your feet while your eyes, perched on retractable wiper-like eye stalks, only allow you to look up. It would be both impossible and time-consuming to sort everything out with their claws and jaw feet, so they act fast instead. Crabs blindly and hurriedly grab everything they can find from the surface layer of the mud bank, which is where life congregates. They take it all in, then use the most anterior part of their mouth to do the sorting out. Organic matter is ingested, while clay is regurgitated and curled into small balls under their mouths. Before the residual clay disturbs their feverish feast, they regularly dispose of it with remarkable agility and drop the balls in a split second. Crabs thus become the first players to complete a new stage in the process of life's creation. The synthesis of organic matter takes on a new dimension as the transformation into muscles moves from a microscopic to a macroscopic scale. Female crabs may not seem as well endowed as their male counterparts, but both their tiny claws are highly functional. The investment of male crabs in a big claw is not without risk. Feeding time is predictably twice as long for males as it is for females, and life outside their burrows can be dangerous. It appears the biggest danger comes from the sky. The appeal of periscopic vision for crabs now makes much more sense. Soil can be overlooked since resources are available all around. Thanks to their armor, fiddler crabs seem to be unstoppable warriors. But how could they stand a chance against much bigger predators and most experimented specialists? Especially when their big claws, males' crabs' pride and joy, which weigh half as much as they do, can be ripped off so easily. The bird's powerful digestive juices effortlessly dissolve the crab's thick shells, which ultimately do little to protect their coveted flesh. Thanks to the energy and amino acids provided by crab meat, these birds can in turn synthesize muscle fibers whose formidable force enables them to defy the laws of gravity. Meanwhile, the powerless crabs have embraced the principle of strength in numbers, as they can rely on a very high fertility rate. Each female lays an average of 50,000 eggs at once. In order to safeguard this precious asset, female crabs remain within the burrows dug by male crabs until their eggs have matured. Meanwhile, they never risk feeding outside. Mariquani crabs have their own social-like organization. Standing next to their burrows perched on the highest points, dominant males coordinate the life of the entire community. In case of immediate danger, they use their oversized claws to sound the alarm. All stop feeding to rush back into their burrows to seek refuge. Once the state of alarm has been lifted, they progressively resume their activities. The higher the burrows are positioned over the mudflat, the longer they remain out of the water. As a result, crabs are able to feed for longer periods of time. This also means that the dominant male crabs occupying these burrows are a source of great envy, which leads to frequent brawls. New species of predators also like to take advantage of this abundant food supply. More than anything, these more aesthetically pleasing animals are much more visible to the human eye and very well suited to these vast yet unstable intertidal habitats, the shorebirds. This spectacle is a testimony to the richness and beauty of nature's treasures that Guyana's mudflats have to offer. A flock of great ornithological diversity with scarlet ibises, snowy egrets, tricolored, and yellow-crowned night herons. During winter season in the northern hemisphere, huge concentrations of 800,000 small waders of various species, plovers, sandpipers, and turnstones settle here on the Guyana mudflats to stock up on the good stuff. Each species has developed its own strategy in order to harvest their fair share with the least possible competition. The birds use whatever weapons Mother Nature has gifted them with. The long-fingered, long-legged foragers dig with their curved beaks, an ideal instrument for locating prey in the soft mud. Smaller wading birds follow the crab's lead. They dig their way blindly through the surface layer of the mud bank. As it receded, the tide trapped some of its marine visitors, mostly small fish and young shrimp. These reckless youngsters didn't leave the mudflat soon enough, which means their lives will come to a premature end. But the demise of these creatures stuck in fluid mud or trapped in pools of water won't be in vain. They allow other lives to flourish. Tide after tide, the new mud deposits are consolidated by the mucus the diatoms produce. Layer by layer, the level of the mudflats rises progressively. The frequency of flooding, which used to be regular, becomes more and more sporadic over shorter periods of time during the highest of spring tides. The surface of the mudflat changes drastically as it's being increasingly exposed to the sun and the wind. It dries out and starts to crackle. Desiccation cracks appear. It may seem like an insignificant detail, but this transformation will upset this ecosystem. Soon, these cracks will become traps and enable astonishing wetland trees to grow, which marks the birth of amphibious mangrove forests. The mangrove trees lining the mudflats form an extraordinary type of forest in which the trees feel perfectly at home on soft and salty soil, poor in oxygen. In French Guiana, the two dominant mangrove species along the seafront are the Avicennia and the laguncularia. These trees have developed a remarkable system for reproducing and dispersing. Their fruits are hydrocorous. They float and survive for long periods of time at the surface of the water, which carries them away from shady areas where they would otherwise have no chance of developing, since the leaves of fully grown trees intercept all the solar energy. The fruit is carried in by the rising tide, then transported out to sea during the ebb tide. It washes up further out on the mudflats exposed to direct sunlight, then gets picked up again, and so forth in a constant back and forth cycle. All the fruit? Not quite. Some of them will wash ashore for good and stay trapped in the desiccation cracks. As soon as the fruit makes contact with the soil, it opens up to allow the inner seed to develop. This seed is viviparous. It germinates while still inside the fruit. And there's a perfectly good reason for this. It needs to take root as quickly as possible to withstand the waves of the ocean's next offensive. The conditions are ideal for seeds to sprout. Sunlight acts as an energy source, plus they have access to water and organic matter stuck inside the mud cracks. In a matter of weeks, a new mangrove forest is born on the mudflat. These young, well-rooted mangrove trees are strong enough to withstand the impact of waves and currents. And in less than a year, they'll be producing new fruit. Millions of small shrubs crowd the space and create a whole new phenomenon to the mudflat: shade. Their leaves absorb almost all solar energy, and very few rays of sunlight are able to reach the ground. The consequences are radical. The now energy-deprived algae, source of the entire food chain, will be progressively eliminated. Their disappearance will cause the migration of all the species which depended on them to feed. Life is now slowly leaving this forest composed of a single species of tree, the Avicennia. They all share the same origin and are exactly the same age. This extraordinary uniformity comes as a result of the very particular way in which the seeds develop after having been carried onto the mudflats by tides. Besides, the silt soil now contains very little oxygen as it is composed of compacted and hardened clay. There is no possible access to fresh air. To make up for the lack of oxygen, the Avicennia grow special breathing roots out of their main roots very early on, as to take in oxygen from the atmosphere the same way divers use a snorkel. They are called pneumatophores, and they grow all over. Enters through tiny pores known as lenticels, which open up to let the oxygen in when they're out of water. In this mangrove forest, these thousands of identical trees are involved in a silent but fierce competition. It is about being the tallest before any other tree in order to benefit from more solar energy, water, and nutrients. The mangrove tree's incredible adaptations still aren't enough, because like any other plant, it needs water. Unfortunately, the seafront only offers salt water. In order to absorb this water, the mangrove trees produce tannins, a complex organic compound which helps them overcome the salt concentration around their roots. But as the water makes its way up to the leaves, the salinity of sap increases to the point that the stomatal pores should close up. Only the stomata, these microscopic organelles all over the leaves, are essential to photosynthesis and plant breathing, because they allow gas exchange to take place with the air. To prevent the stomata from closing up, mangrove trees have developed a seemingly simple but highly sophisticated response. Their leaves are covered in glands, which is how they get rid of excess salt and release it in the form of crystals. Rain pouring on the leaves finishes off the cleaning process. But the high concentration of tannins, which enables the trees to absorb salt water, has a major impact on the forest. Their leaves are extremely toxic, a highly effective strategy for protecting themselves from herbivores. In this mangrove forest, there's very little apparent life. Only the sound of insects, a few birds chirping, and the wind rustling through the leaves, while just a few meters away on the mudflat, crabs and birds continue to swarm galore. Has animal life suddenly disappeared from this environment? Not entirely. An extremely rare, if not legendary mammal, for it can only be seen once in a blue moon, seems to find the resources it needs in the mangrove. the Virginia deer, also known as the whitetail. Against all odds, it feeds on mangrove leaves. The evolution of its digestive system and microbial flora has made it possible for the deer to digest the toxic substances supposed to protect the trees from herbivores. As a result, the presence of these animals attracts another mammal with a completely different diet, but equally difficult to observe: the jaguar, South America's largest wildcat. The mangrove is full of surprises. While the forest is known for providing shelter to shorebirds during high tide, it also turns out to be a great feeding spot for the flaming scarlet ibises. Most of the leaves and dead wood are trapped by the pneumatophores. The slow degradation of vegetation therefore takes place where it falls. Carbon gradually builds up in the surface layer of the soil, while nitrogen and phosphorus are released to enrich rainwater. During heavy rainfalls, these nutrients are washed down to the mudflat. Once again, the mangrove forest plays a crucial role. Thanks to their roots, mangrove trees are able to capture nitrogen and phosphorus from the depths of the soil, then release them once their leaves have decomposed, fertilizing the mudflats in the process. With its outstanding and undefeated capacity to adjust to dire conditions, and after growing at lightning speed, the mangrove forest is now dying of old age. Throughout its lifetime, it has photosynthesized significant volumes of organic carbon out of atmospheric carbon dioxide. It has also provided copious amounts of nutrition for the mudflats, a powerful source of life. In the fight against global warming, mangrove forests all over the world serve as highly effective natural wells for trapping carbon from the atmosphere and helping life flourish by fertilizing mudflats, thus feeding shrimp, fish, and human beings alike. In addition, they constitute highly effective natural reefs against heavy swells and tsunamis. Mangroves must be preserved and protected at all costs.